The Hawk, the Hound, and the Butterfly. Chapter 4. Apollo. Part 1. Apollo's feet were wet bricks, stomping along the forest floor. His lungs expanded, trying to breathe in fresh air, but were hindered, as if hands were clasping around his neck. Pale grey stone peeked through the yellowing leaves. Apollo was getting closer to home now. Well, he was close to the city he was born in, but that's not what ever made it home. The only thing that still made it feel like a home had just disappeared. Raised voices floated towards him on the wind. The trees gave way to a crowd of bustling people. The end of the day was drawing near, and the gates were readying to close. Apollo submerged himself into the sea of people. Farmers pushing past with empty wagons, soldiers hobbling along on makeshift crutches, children skittering about chasing after each other. "Excuse us, son," a man said as he placed a hand on Apollo. Apollo realized it was his injured left shoulder and winced. He stepped aside as two healers passed, carrying a stretcher. A bloodied sheet pulled over the body that lay on it. A memory sought to drag Apollo back into the darkness. He pushed it aside. Artemis needed him too. Apollo weaved through the crowd like a dancer, turning and stepping and ducking. If only they knew what he did, they would all part, and he'd have a clear run to see his father. "Out of the way, shrimp!" A monstrous arm shoved Apollo aside. He turned and opened his mouth to snap at the owner, but caught himself in time. Athena? The name was shaky coming from his mouth. He hoped he was wrong, and the person wouldn't turn around. But they did. Athena's armor was loose around her waist, and dull. Her hair was riddled with leaves and twigs, and a gash that had dripped blood down her face, which was now dry and flaking off. But she looked worse the moment she noticed him. Athena huffed. "I can't deal with your nonsense at the moment, little prince. Why don't you go play with your pipe or whatever it is? Or better yet, go run off a cliff." Apollo shook his head, ignoring the little prince jibe. "Athena, listen to me." "No, you listen to me," Athena said. She drew closer, imposing her height over Apollo. "Stay out of my way. I have to go see the king." She turned and started to walk off. "Wait, I have to see father too." Athena stopped. "Whatever nonsense you have to tell him, it's about as important as that pile of horse manure over there, compared to what I have to tell him." Athena pointed to a man shoveling horse droppings into a wheelbarrow. Apollo put his head in his hands and groaned. It had never been easy for him to get on with Athena. He just wished that this one time she would stop and listen to him before laying into him with the insults. He took a deep breath and looked back up at her, but she was gone. There was no way he could let her get in to see their father first. They could be in there all night, and hours would be wasted instead of spending them looking for Artemis. Apollo stumbled towards the man shoveling manure. "Sir, may I borrow your horse?" Apollo didn't wait for a reply. He unhooked the horse's reins and pulled himself up onto its back. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" Apollo took off. The man chased after him, shaking his shovel in the air. "I'll bring her back," Apollo called behind him. The man gave up after a few paces. He wouldn't have been able to catch Apollo anyway, because the horse was incredibly fast, and he must have known it. Apollo pushed her hard, weaving in and out of the marketplace, between people packing up their stalls and driving carts around. The horse responded with incredible speed and agility, like nothing Apollo had ever seen before. He wondered where the man he'd taken her from had gotten her. Apollo turned a corner and could see Athena sprinting just ahead of him. She'd ditched her armor somewhere, and had made it pretty far ahead of him, but now her path began to incline. Sweat soaked down her back as she pushed on. Apollo squeezed his legs into the horse's sides. She answered by speeding up the hill. Apollo steered her towards Athena. As they passed, he gave her a sly smile at the side of his mouth and winked at her. She would probably hurt him for it later, but it was worth it. just for the look she gave him as he passed her. Plus, she'd have to catch him first. Apollo slowed the horse to a trot as they passed through an ornate wooden archway. A box large enough to fit 4 people sat at the crest of the hill. It was carved with the same floral pattern as the archway. The Riverside Elevator, commonly referred to as the Mistress's Elevator, after King Edric's 6 wives, who actually only had 1 wife, but he also had 5 mistresses. These days it was rarely used, but like all the elevators to the underground halls of the king, it was still manned and guarded. A haggard old man leant against a winch that had thick metal chains wrapped around it. The man's eyes fluttered open as Apollo drew near. Apollo slid off his horse and a pain shot up his arm. He'd almost forgotten about his injuries. He grabbed his arm and rubbed his fingers into the joint. The pain slowly faded. "Took a fall from your horse, young Master Apollo?" Apollo paused. He usually wasn't recognized so easily. His other siblings were the ones always in the public eye, while he just kept his head down and did as he was told. And Apollo didn't exactly look like someone of royal birth at that moment, with scrapes all over his face and arms, stains on his clothes, and a tattered bandage around his shoulder. Something like that," Apollo answered. He looped the horse's reins through the archway. "I need to take the elevator down." "That's good, because it only goes down from here," the old man grinned. He opened up the gate to the elevator and motioned for Apollo to step in. "Now, I must warn you, these old bones can only move so fast, but if I had an assistant, someone with young blood flowing through his veins..." The old man let the thought drift. Apollo smiled and nodded. "I'll put in a good word," he said as he stepped inside the elevator. A cool breeze whipped up through the elevator shaft. A shiver ran over Apollo's body. "You'll need this." The old man shoved a glowing lantern at Apollo. "She gets pretty dark down there. No coin for fancy lighting. That's all been spent on the war. But of course you knew that." The old man winked at Apollo. Apollo nodded and placed the lantern over a hook in the middle of the roof of the elevator. "What's your name, sir?" "Not sir, just Hector," he replied. "Well, thank you for your help." "Just Hector?" Apollo raised an eyebrow. Hector chuckled. He slammed the gates of the elevator and latched them shut. The elevator suddenly seemed a lot smaller. Apollo's breathing quickened and his heart beat a little faster. He'd done this before, he reminded himself. It would only be a short ride. His fingers continued to flex at his side. Hector shuffled past through the gaps in the wooden gate, going from one side of the elevator to the other, tugging on ropes. "They'd better be awake down there, those mole rats," Hector grumbled to himself. He gripped the handle of the winch and began cranking it. The elevator jumped and started to descend. Apollo took a deep breath, and the last thing he saw before being plunged into the earth was Athena in the distance. Apollo was just a boy, only 6 years old. His mother had passed not long ago, and his father had priorities that didn't include him at the top. So it had been suggested that Apollo go to the Arcadian Guard Academy. "You need to learn discipline," his father had said to him. "You need to learn how to protect yourself." Apollo didn't believe that at all. He never got into much trouble, never had the chance to with 2 or 3 guards that were always within spitting distance of him. He knew they were that far because one of his favorite hobbies was to ball up wads of paper and see if he could hit them. He even had a whole points system for hitting certain body parts. The head was a safe 2-pointer, while the nose got a big 50 points, but it was always a little riskier. Apollo wasn't worried so much about going to the academy. He just didn't want to leave his sister all by herself. Artemis was still young, and she'd get lonely without him. He wasn't sure she would cope well if he wasn't there. Regardless of what he thought or said, Apollo was packed up and sent to the academy. He trained hard and learnt the basics of what it took to become an Arcadian soldier. Sometimes he even saw his older siblings, who had been going to the academy for years, but they never took much notice of him. Being at the academy grew on Apollo, but each night as he listened to the snores of his fellow classmates, he'd stare out the window at the moon and sense something was missing. The time came when each student was to choose a discipline that would be the focus of their future training and ultimately what they would graduate into the Arcadian Guard as. Each day students would train in a discipline, and by the end of the week they would have made their choice as to what to focus on. Apollo tried the sword, the spear, and the axe, but none of them felt like him. On the final day, Apollo picked up a bow, and the moment he let off his first arrow, his sense that he was incomplete disappeared. Apollo advanced quickly through his archery classes, becoming one of the top students within weeks. His newfound talent caught the attention of his sister Athena, who was in the latter stages of her training, nearing graduation. "You've turned out to be quite good with that," she said to him as he practiced alone in the training yard one evening. "Oh, yeah, thanks," Apollo said, stumbling nervously over his words. Whispers filtered down through the grades of Athena's exploits and how she'd come out on top of her class. It was the reason she was the person that everyone knew to stay clear of. "Perhaps we could see how good you are." She smiled wryly, eyes unblinking, focused on Apollo. Apollo shrugged. "Sure, I can show you." He picked up an arrow and stepped up to the mark that was the closest distance to the target. He knocked his arrow and lifted his bow. Athena stepped in front of him. "That's too easy for you," she said. Athena pulled out a red apple that glinted in the moonlight. "Shoot this apple." Apollo frowned. "Okay." "I wasn't finished." "Off of my head." Athena smiled. She strode towards the target and stood facing him in front of it. She placed the apple on top of her head. It balanced perfectly still. "Take your best shot." Apollo's bow shook in his hands. He looked over his shoulder, hoping his teacher, Sir Gallard, would appear to come and check on his form as he often did. He would stop whatever nonsense Athena was trying to do and send her on her way. But he was oddly absent that evening. "Come on, little prince. We haven't got all night, or would you like everyone to know what a wimp you are?" Apollo's eye twitched. He rubbed it hard. Apollo believed he was a good archer. He'd always hit the bullseye at that distance before, so why shouldn't he be able to hit an apple? Apollo took a deep breath and stretched his fingers. He raised his bow and pulled back on it. All the words and lessons his teachers had taught him were spinning around in his head. He closed his eyes and breathed in. He opened his eyes and breathed out. He let the arrow go and it flew through the air. The arrow pinned the apple to the target behind Athena. Athena didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. Athena pulled the arrow from the target and pulled the apple out. She threw the arrow at the ground. "Nice shot. Now it's my turn." Athena marched up to Apollo. She tossed the apple that had been broken in half at him. Apollo fumbled with his bow, but managed to catch both pieces. "Give me that." She swiped at Apollo's bow. He pulled it back. "But it's specially made for me. Just give it to me." Athena grabbed at the bow again, and Apollo let her take it. He walked towards the target, taking it one step at a time, like a dead man walking, which, for all he knew, he could have been. "Now put the apple on your head." Apollo hesitated. He looked at the two halves in his hands. "But it's cut in half," he said. "Well, then put half on your head." Athena's smile was hiding something, but Apollo found his hands moving, and half an apple was sitting on his head. "Stay still." Apollo froze, his hands by his side, eyes looking straight down at Athena. She raised his bow, still smiling. As soon as she let it go, he could see the arrow wasn't going to hit its target, at least not what Apollo thought the target was. He shifted to the right, but not quickly enough. The arrow hit his left shoulder. Blood began gushing down his arm. Apollo screamed and fell to his knees. "Oops, I missed," he heard Athena say. Suddenly, she was at his side. She knelt down beside him and leaned in close. "Just remember, little prince." He could feel the heat from her breath on his ear. "You will never be as good as me." She vanished before Apollo's screams brought help. The arrow had pierced the joint in his shoulder. The healers advised a different discipline, but Apollo refused. They gave him herbs that would soothe the pain, and a foul-smelling paste that would heal the wound from the inside, but the scar would always remain.